I'm James Weeks. I work for Global OTT, which is the team that looks after Now TV UK, Ireland, Germany and Italy. And my particular role in the product team is Head of Product Quality, and so I'm responsible for the in-life product quality of our customer-facing products. So when did I first get into technology? It was probably about 9 years old, and a friend of mine had a BBC Micro, and God, I wanted one. And I nagged my parents and they bought me one, and I started writing code for that. And then after a brief hiatus in journalism, came back to it and started doing product management and technology stuff, really from my sort of early 30s onwards, and I've been doing it ever since. What is it about technology that I like? I like being able to make change quickly to things. I like the way that you can pull a lever with something and it just is different instantly for millions of customers. So you can tweak things, you can optimize them, you can make them better, and you don't have months and months of thinking about it. Sometimes you just tweak a number in a configuration file, it's done. I started off here as a journalist in 1999, and I edited live TV news shows for quite a few years. And then I started doing product management stuff for what was in those days the very early sort of devices like iPhones and Android phones and Windows Mobile, if you remember that, Red Button TV and all those sorts of things. My job is to look after in-life product quality for the Now family, which is Now UK, Italy and Republic of Ireland, and WOW Germany. And really, it's about making sure that our customers' voices are heard within the product team and making sure that everything we do has our customers at the forefront of our minds. We need to make experiences really amazing. We need to sort out bugs and crashes and those sorts of things. And my role is about bringing a cultural change within that part of the organisation to help people think about things in that way. How would I describe my job to people at a barbecue? I tell them I do product management stuff for Now TV, is really what I say, and that I'm the sort of voice of the customer within the Now TV product team. And so I represent the customer back into the product team to express where customers are pleased with what we're doing and things they'd like changed. We are 10 years into the life of Now. We are probably only about that into the life of Netflix. The TV industry's been going on for nigh on a century now. We are in incredibly early days in understanding what customers' expectations of video services are these days, how they will use them, and what they want to pay for in the future. And I think this is a very exciting time because really it doesn't feel like it maybe all the time, but it's a greenfield site. We can do pretty much whatever we want in terms of a kind of creative treatment of storytelling. There's so much to be done and so much exploration and experiment that we can still do. It's super exciting.
User experience, and as I heard the ripple go around the room, are we going to stand up and run out of the room now? So for those of you old enough to remember it, that was back from the 1890s, and it was a user experience in a cinema where when they played it, allegedly, everybody ran out of the cinema, ran to the back of the cinema because it was so terrifying to see this train come towards you in real life. So pity we're not in the cinema today because it probably would have been a little bit more realistic. So, my name's Chris Johns. I'm part of the architecture and strategy group here at Sky. Lots of familiar faces, so I probably know quite a few of you. And for those who don't know me, I've been at Sky for 33 years now. You don't look that old. Go on. You don't look that old. No, so I've seen everything from analog TV, where we had one analog channel per transponder, and back in 1989, there were 4 channels in the UK. So kind of the fresh faces amongst you kind of go, how could you survive with just 4 channels? You had to switch on and switch off. You had to run back to the sofa to see part 2 of the episode. So it was that kind of stress that we actually lived in those days. But then back in 1989, Sky was launched, and what did we do? we doubled the number of channels. You had 24-hour news, 24 hours of movies, so you could pick and choose what you wanted. So yet another new user experience for people. It took 10 years for something to change then, and that's when we started to go digital. So from those 8 channels, we started to grow steadily. But in the analog world, there's only a certain amount of space up on those satellite transponders, and it starts to get very crowded in space if you try to fill them all up. So we had to find a new way of doing it. Digital, compression, putting more channels on one transponder. So those dozens of channels suddenly changed into hundreds of channels, and you had a plethora of actual channels you could actually watch of every genre and every nationality on the platform. So it started to open up, again, the user experience to everyone. I Sky Plussed it. Do you remember that phrase? Synonymous with the Sky Q box. Not Sky Q, it's the Sky HD box then, wasn't it? 2001, we launched that and it changed everything. Again, for those who don't remember VHS, an overrun in the old football and the penalties running on into the next half an hour. You went to watch it the next day, you stopped at 9 o'clock on the dot because you thought the news was going to start. A little bit of metadata, no comment, Pat, allowed us to actually delay the start of the next programme on the Sky box, so you never missed those penalties again. Everything was recorded on the box, so you could actually look at it, and everything was time shifted automatically. You didn't have to worry about your Video Plus technologies. Now we start to get towards the newer technology, Sky Q. Everybody knows about Sky Q, and if you don't know about Sky Q, shame on you. It gave us UHD. It gave us Atmos. Stop talking, Patty. It gave us personalisation and voice commands. You can now talk to your TV, as we heard this morning with Fraser and Stephen. And being able to talk to your TV is kind of a game changer, especially for the accessibility, those who use accessibility. You don't have to reach and touch for the buttons. So kind of that was innovations and made the user experience totally different with the Sky Q box. And then I'm not going to talk about glass too much because Fraser has hopefully sold it to everyone around this room. But it's one wire simplicity. You take it home, you plug the mains in and off you go. It is that simple. And the other thing I do like to say about it is it's got damn good audio. So people don't mention audio. It's always pushed to the side. So it's got Atmos audio built into it and it's loud. So all these flat screen TVs who sound tinny when you turn them up, it doesn't do that with the Sky Glass. It gives you a very, very good audio image. But that's enough about a bit of history of Sky. But what we're going to talk about here today is a few of the technologies that are bubbling around the corner, and we're starting to talk about in some of the industry bodies. We're going to hear about next generation audio and object-based media. And I've got to do two things before we go on to the other subject. Slido, slido.com, if you want to ask any questions. I don't think there's any mics around, so you're going to have to kind of interact in an electronic way in this modern age. And the password or the enter code is TSCE, Technology Summit CE. Chris, I don't know, something else after that, but TSCE. So any questions? Not now, not yet. Just kind of pace yourself. There's a whole lot we're going to be talking about. So after NGA and Object-Based Media, or OBM, as the acronyms are, we'll talk about another acronym, which is HDR, High Dynamic Range. And to do that and tell us about the progress of HDR and High Dynamic Range, I'm going to welcome Caris Hughes. Caris, yeah, big round of applause. Go on, pick it up, pick it up. You're going to build yourself up for two other people yet, so that was your first practice. Caris is the Senior Picture Quality Engineer, and she's recently deserted me for Sky Glass. I had to get that in, Caris. But we're going to talk a little bit about HDR now. So, Caris, for those who don't know, do you want to just give a brief overview of what High Dynamic Range actually is and how it works?
Have you seen who's in this room? You always do this to me. First it was lip sync.
You can do it.
Anyway,
You can do it in 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Then.
For those on the stream, High Dynamic Range, basically, we've got very used to watching TV pictures that were designed to be viewed on not particularly bright screens. And consumer screens have got brighter and brighter over the years. And HDR, what it does is it gives us image signals that genuinely contain a high dynamic range, a high contrast ratio, with detail represented all the way from the darks to the bright parts of a picture. So we can represent real scenes in a way that is more true to life, and we couple that with a wider colour gamut, so we can represent a wider array of colours with more intensity and more bright, sparkly things.
So that's how it's had a transformative effect, and how is it going to transform the viewing experience if you're watching SDR and you move to an HDR channel? Kind of you just get brighter pictures.
No.
Why? Tell me why.
No, so we're not about exaggerating images. We're about creating images that are more immersive. And if you look at a use case like sports, it means that your football game is more immersive to you because it looks like you're looking through a window, we like to say.
So
yeah,
you're getting better pictures, so you're not getting brighter pixels, you're getting better pixels. Yeah. We really wanted the whole room to join in there, but it didn't happen. Okay, moving on. So it's evolved. So kind of how can, we've talked about high dynamic range, and I do realise we're running a bit late, so we're going to have to kind of try to accelerate a little bit. But high dynamic, can you get it on every television? Can you get it on every service? Obviously, I know the answer to this, but for those who are watching in, you may want to tell everyone.
We've moved on from the days where it's kind of a couple of reference decoders and the odd streaming service. It's now everywhere. If you're a serious platform owner, you're providing content in HDR, whether that's a streaming service or something like the Sky Glass or Sky Q platforms, and then we're seeing widespread adoption across consumer panels as well, whether it's the bottom end or the high end of the market, so everywhere.
But what about content? Because some things that always slowed us down previously was kind of being able to get content to PC, because it's all very good having the hardware in the marketplace, but if you haven't got anything to show on it, then you can't show how good it is, really.
Plenty of content, so if you're watching stuff on Netflix or Disney Plus, Amazon Prime, HDR is there for all the key titles that you want to watch pretty much by default. If you're watching Sky, we have a HDR VOD catalogue. We have HDR linear services, so you can watch all of those really important Premier League matches. Anishang, I know you love the Premier League, in HDR.
Yeah, and there are other service providers like BT and BBC.
Sport,
yeah, so I mean, it's safe to say that in the UK, I mean, we are very, very lucky that we've got all the major broadcasters kind of have really adopted HDR. As I said, kind of, BT have got kind of an HDR channel up streaming quite happily, and that's on the Sky platform as well. And the BBC with the iPlayer service, is showing kind of loads of great HDR. Wimbledon is probably the most recent one. So it is available, and I think we're very, very lucky here in the UK that we've got a large amount of HDR content that's available for us to show on the platform. Anyway, so moving on. If we say HDR, we've got different flavours. Do you want to talk about those flavours?
The quickest tour ever, because we're running short on time.
Yep. No, we've got another couple of minutes. I've changed the timing because I have the authority.
Yes. As you all know, there's a million different names and formats flying around when we talk about HDR. They're all mostly based on two core technologies. So PQ, Perceptual Quantizer, developed by the lovely people at Dolby, and that's what we call SMPTE standard. Yeah. It's what we call a display referred format, where the signal represents real luminance values, I guess, and the goal is to replicate the exact intent that you had on a mastering display. And then we have another format called hybrid log gamma, which was co-developed by the BBC and NHK, and that's what we call a scene-referred format, and that's designed to kind of scale to the capabilities of a display. So those are the two core technologies, but then you're more familiar probably with terms like Dolby Vision, HDR10+, HDR10, and those are all formats that add metadata, typically to PQ, but sometimes to HRG as well, and that's intended to help those lower capability panels present pictures in a way that is closer to what was intended at the point of mastering. Whether it's one bit of metadata for a whole title or frame-by-frame metadata in something like Dolby Vision.
Yeah. So kind of those are ways of delivering the different kinds of HDRs, and we can convert. And I know a lot of your job we don't have time to go into. So if you want to talk to Caris about conversion and lookup tables, she'd be more than willing to spend kind of 30 or 40 minutes talking to you afterwards. But we have got a session at around, was it 5 o'clock? Where we're going to be available to anybody who wants to talk to us and ask specific questions. You're more than welcome to come up to anybody here and have a chat with us if you do want to know more. But that's the delivery of the HDR. What about the kind of the content creation? Because there is a slight nuance change between the content creation side of it, live, and more specifically I'm talking about here, and kind of the way that Sky actually produces a single workflow. We don't have a workflow for SDR and HD and a separate workflow for UHD and HDR. We have to do it in a very cost-effective single manner. It's worth talking about that, because that's one of the reasons that it works for sport.
I guess there's a lot of aspects that have made that possible, but I guess the two things I would focus on are we're using a format that is but it's been practical for operations to pick up and learn how to use. So, sorry Pat, but we use HRG in our HDR linear production. But it's very practical for somebody in MCR who's used to monitoring an SDR signal to adapt and learn how to monitor something like HRG. It's practical for sports production teams as well. And then the other key thing is having conversions in place that we trust and we can repeatedly apply across solution A and solution B, and we trust that we're going to implement it the same way. So the core to our single stream sports workflow is the guys that are racking the camera can see what the SDR down conversion is going to look like in their truck. So they know what the impact of the racking is going to have on the HDR picture and on the SDR picture. We don't need 2 camera outputs. We don't need 2 OB production workflows. Single workflow, conversion being previewed and recreated at the beginning, and the same conversions being done with the same reliability and result at the end of the workflow.
Brilliant. So it's very simple, in other words.
Simple.
Keep it simple.
Super simple.
Keep it simple, and you don't make errors because you don't want to make errors, because live sport, you don't have the tolerance to actually make any mistakes. We've got to run on now. We could talk forever about HDR and high dynamic range and what it's going to offer. And the encouragement is for, if there's any content producers amongst us, jump onto the bandwagon, because once you've done HDR and been able to display it to the consumers, you're not turning back. So thank you, Karis. A big round of applause for Karis. Right, it's time to welcome our next speaker. Now, he's an audio man, which means that you can't hear clapping very loudly, so you're going to have to clap even louder for him. It's Dave Marston. He's Senior BBC R&D Engineer. He's also a chair of the EBU activities related to Next Generation Audio, NGA, and Personalised Sound Experience. And it says here he's the father of ADM. So I congratulate you on your birth, and hopefully you'll be able to tell us a little bit about it. So, David.
Thank you for referring me as father, not grandfather, which has been quite a few times.
So NGA, we'll move on swiftly. Next Generation Audio, NGA, what kind of brief explanation for those that don't know it, and I know there's a lot will understand it already, but there's people watching in from outside who may not understand, but it's a buzzword?
It is a buzzword. It's a phrase, as you say, it stands for Next Generation Audio, and it's supposed to cover the different experiences in audio, namely immersiveness, so that's sound coming from all 3 dimensions, so it's a step up from stereo and surround. Personalisation and interaction, so this allows the listener and the viewer to interact with the audio, to tune it to how they feel comfortable listening to it, or maybe selecting different options. And the term has sort of different meanings to different people as well in terms of different scope. So my personal view in this, NGA is really referring to the emission end of things in the technology, so emission codecs, and the emission codecs around that support NGA technology are sort of Dolby AC4, MPEG-H audio, and DTS UHD. So they're the 3 main codecs that are around. They're all standardized codecs, and they support what we now call NGA audio. But NGA isn't the only 3-letter acronym related to audio I'm going to talk about. The other one is ADM.
ADM, tell us about that.
So ADM stands for Audio Definition Model. So this is a metadata model that allows you to technically describe audio. So this sort of allows you to sort of describe what the audio channels are, how they should be used, and so on. And ADM being very, very flexible allows you to describe any type of audio format you want. So whether it's channel-based, traditional loudspeaker channels, whether it's scene-based, things like ambisonics, which some of the audio people might be familiar with, or object-based position objects. So this is where you specify sounds in particular points in space. So these are the three main formats of audio around at the moment. And the ADM can describe all those, any combination of those you want to. And it's extremely flexible, so you can describe anything from a simple stereo pair up to anything, including NGA, or anything beyond that, in theory. So it's extremely
effectively
flexible.
are mixing down into your destination or delivery format from any format upstream, which in essence, I guess, is giving the producer greater flexibility and not having to create multiple.
Exactly.
Multiple.
So you don't. So the producer doesn't have to think, well, I'm going to have to make this for a 5.1 layout, or I'll have to make this for a stereo layout. They can just do one production, attach all the ADM metadata they need, and then downstream it can get handled and converted to whichever platform they require, whether it be an NGA or whichever NGA codec gets used down the line, or whether it's legacy systems or something else altogether. So it's extremely flexible.
So with the ability to control individual streams of audio, obviously kind of one of the things that's been talked about before is kind of the mumbling of the programs and not being able to hear people talking over the background, and accessibility, kind of audio description. Does it enable that, make it easier? Or
yeah, I mean, accessibility is a big thing. I mean, I know colleagues at the BBC there know about the complaints we get about mumbling and dialogue that's not clear. And of course, there's a huge diversity of hearing abilities in terms of audience, and we want to, please as many people as we can. So being able to, for the user to be able to sort of adjust the relative levels of dialogue and background noises, and it doesn't necessarily have to be dialogue. Dialogue enhancement is a phrase you hear about, but there's other phrases. For example, narrative importance is another expression that's used for adjusting sounds that are more important. So it might necessarily be dialogue that's important. It could be, a particular sound effect that's important. So
you just enhance that.
You just enhance that, but by producing sound with all these objects separated, all these sounds kept separate from the beginning, and they get delivered to the end user, then they can adjust it. Now, content producers don't have to worry about them screwing up a mix. You can set limits and everything. You don't have to sort of worry about bits of audio being completely eliminated if you don't want it to.
So at this point, it's a good idea to just kind of briefly talk about some trials that the EBU did. This is your EBU job now.
Yeah.
With the Eurovision Song Contest, hurrah, hurrah, back in 2019.
Yeah.
And you did special mixes for that and were able to demonstrate the ability of what NGA can actually deliver for it. So just give a brief overview of some of the capabilities you're able to deliver from that.
Well, for those of you familiar with the Eurovision Song Contest, and obviously it's got a history of being an experimental, that's how it started, as an experimental platform. We did some mixes where you could have there's immersiveness to the actual music itself, so we had sort of a three-dimensional audio play out, and obviously being a Eurovision Song Contest, there's lots of different languages on offer as well, so the end users could actually select which language they wanted, which language option, but obviously the background music stayed the same. You didn't have to switch whole programs, so it gave you that extra flexibility there. And also you could select things like audio description and also adjust the levels of the balance between the dialogue and the music as well. So we did some trials back then, using some NGA codecs, and hopefully in the near future, I'm kind of hoping sort of maybe next year we can maybe do some more. We have to see though.
So what's happening next year?
Well, it's going to be a home one, isn't it?
Oh yes, a home match. It'll be exciting.
Home match, wherever it's going to be.
So kind of just still with your EBU hat on, kind of what else, is the EBU doing anything else kind of around kind of next generation audio and ADM? Because you almost described ADM as being defined and it being finished now. But it sounds like there's...
Well, there's still work. I mean, there's two main areas. There's the standardisation process. So it fed into it's an ITU standard, which is obviously makes it free and open. You don't have to pay for it, and it's completely, accessible for everybody to use. But it's also evolving. People come along and say, oh, can we have this and have that? So things need to be updated gradually over time. And also, we need to move ADM around, so there's SMPTE standards to be able to carry it over AES3, over MADI, over MXF and so on. So there's work going on in SMPTE to standardise its transport. But the EBU are also working on some products as well. For example, there's something called the Production Suite, which is, some of you may have heard of the Reaper DAW. So we've built some plugins and extensions to that to allow you to export ADM metadata and do some object-based production as well. And we're also producing some sort of ADM tools as well.
Okay, so audio isn't finished within the EBU, it's still a lot of work to do.
Oh, still plenty of work to do,
You told me earlier on you've got some trials.
Yeah, we've got some trials coming up in November, so these are for EBU members only. So anybody here is an EBU member, you're welcome to join it, and this is where we're going to go through and demonstrate how ADM works with NGA codecs and how you sort of produce
Okay,
material.
That's good. I'm very conscious of time because we are lagging severely behind because of the... we're just blaming Fraser because he overtalked this afternoon, didn't he, talking about glass. David, thank you very much. A round of applause, please.
So we'll do a demo of SADM at IBC in the UHD forum booth.
Okay, so I've just been informed if anybody's going out to IBC allowed to travel to Amsterdam, go to the UHD forum booth and you'll be able to see a demonstration of next generation audio in all its glory. Okay, without more ado, we're going to talk about objects now. So every one of your claps is an individual object. Think about that as you clap. Elfed Howells, who's a consultant, startup technologist and CEO of Macroblock, has got over 25 years in this wonderful industry of television. Elfed, please come up.
Thanks, Chris.
So this is your first slide pleasure of the day. It's relatively brief, but we when you start to talk about objects, you've got to do some visual demonstration around it. So, Elfed, tell us about what object-based media is, OBM.
Well, it's not new at all. For over probably 100 years now, we've struggled to carry lots of things together with our media. You know, Dave was just talking about all the bits of audio you need to carry these days. Carys was talking about all the different formats of HDR you need to carry. And even back in the day, if you look at all the colors on that frame of film, they were struggling to find space to put all the little bits and bobs that they wanted to carry alongside the media. These days, obviously it's getting worse and worse, or better and better, whichever way you want to look at it. There are myriads of things that you want to carry alongside your media. You've got multiple audio tracks, you've got subtitles, audio description, haptics, languages, EPG data, trailers, bumpers, all sorts of pieces that are related to your media. So a couple of years ago, this sort of started bubbling up, and Ofcom asked me and others to provide a report on what was going on and how it could possibly develop in the industry. And by the way, just in case you're interested, that's the metadata that you need to carry on your film. But in the report, we kind of learned really that there were three main axes of object-based media. You're probably familiar with some of the layers. They've talked about them in terms of audio. You can have lots of different layers of audio that you play back. Choose whichever one you want to have. Maybe you want the French commentary, maybe you want the home commentary, the away commentary. You might want dialogue enhancement, etc. Those are all layers, as well as things like graphics. You might have an alternative video. Those are all layers that you would have. They run alongside the media at the same kind of time as the media. But you can choose which ones you'd like to have. The second axis is more around chunks of media, segments of media. These might be match highlights. There might be a news program where you have 12 different stories in the news, and you might say, well, I've only got 5 minutes, just give me the top stories. And that might choose Object 1, which might be the top story of the day, Object 2, the second story, and so on. Similarly, we've seen lots of branching narratives coming now from lots of different suppliers. Everyone's experimenting with it, and people are now taking it very seriously. Alternative endings, you've got navigate your way through the program. The BBC have done it. Netflix have got some things on their platform that do it. YouTube does it. It's very common these days. The third axis is more around the other bits and bobs that you have to carry along with your media. So you might have social media content, still frames, you might have bumpers, trailers, you might have information like Amazon X-Ray, which tells you who's in the scene, what are they wearing, where was it filmed, etc. Now, all of that together now, you know, if you imagine the bucket that you have to put all your media into, it's becoming bigger and bigger with more and more compartments in it that you need to have. So the question's being asked, what should the industry do about that? Is there a way to treat it as objects?
That's what it started on. So take us through kind of, you know, whereabouts should you be actually recreating these objects? Should you just use it in production, or should you move it downstream and deliver it to the home, which is obviously what we're talking about with next generation audio as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the answer is all of those. So maybe if you start in production by collecting all this information, making sure you have it in a rich object-based database of some kind, then that opens out opportunities for you further down the road. So if you think of where you put these objects back together, today quite often it's done in production. So in production you would take all the pieces that you have, you'd put them all together, and you'd send out the program. That's the traditional way of doing it, let's say. More and more these days, there's opportunities for you to do that in the cloud. So you might say, well, I want the 5-minute version, and the cloud just gives you, or the edge might give you that 5-minute version. This happens a lot already in other industries, and I think media might move this way as well. The third one is more possibly what happens in next generation audio, where the device itself gets a load of objects coming in, all the little bits of audio come in with all their metadata, and the device itself renders those back into what you hear in your home. So there's opportunities all the way through depending on device capabilities, but also depending on how many objects you have and how personalized you want the content to be.
So this is involving all facets of kind of the broadcast technology and all areas of production, which is like David and co,
Yeah.
to actually embrace what you're doing and you to embrace what's happening with NGA and all things. So how can we move this forward is probably the kind of the final question I need to ask, because we're rushed a little bit.
Absolutely. So, you know, I mean, HDR and the next generation audio are already quite mature, but this object-based technology is not quite there yet. There's a lot of confusion, you know, it means different things to different people. There's a lot of point solutions, so great solution. You know, ADM is a brilliant solution for audio, but it only works for audio. If you want to carry haptics or graphics, it's not suitable. Similarly, you know, HDR has its own system, subtitling has its own system, audio description has its own system. They've all been developed piecemeal over time. Now, you know, what the industry is starting to talk about now is, well, how can we make a system that can handle any of these things? And when something else comes along, be that, you know, next census data or extra information somewhere, how can we have a framework that expands? I think the workflow certainly needs to improve, and we need to standardize. So from a standardization point of view, work is already starting. On Monday, so this Monday, the DVB started its group study mission into object-based media and what it can do from a distribution point of view. I think SMPTE is also looking at this area and how to expand the mastering formats to accommodate objects in a more meaningful way. So I think it's moving, but it's early days.
Early days, but we're keeping moving. And there is a very, very, very good working group here in the UK that actually meets quite regularly to work out where we're going forward with this. Elford, thank you very much for that. Sorry to rush you a little bit, but there's still a lot to talk about, and we haven't got very many minutes to talk about it. We've talked about two of our senses at the moment. That's just audio, hearing things, and seeing things. So the question as we move forward, this is more of a teaser for the future, is kind of what other senses do we have, and what should we be using? We all know about these. We've got sight and sound, which is what we have at the moment on televisions. We have touch, and this morning David talked about haptics and people wearing haptic vests and gloves and everything like that. Is that the next thing? I always embrace what I call visceral sound. It's that subwoofer, and in being a human, you can often feel the train come through the underground station before you can actually hear it. It's that deep rumbling where you can sense something happening because of the environment you're in. That's the touch. That's the visceral element of it. How can we embrace that? How can we bring that forward? Smell. Everybody remembers smelly vision, don't they? Kind of, yeah. It's not the creating the smell that's a problem. It's the getting rid of it afterwards, because it linger-longers, and if you get a bad smell, linger-longering. Yeah, I'm going to stop there. Taste is an interesting one. It links in with smell as well, but the complexity of getting taste in and trying to cue people to put things into their mouth, to taste things as you're watching a cookery program. It may work for MasterChef, I don't know. Maybe an interesting opportunity, another user experience, but it's not the easiest thing to do. And then there's a few others. Balance. We don't fall over. We've got the inner ear. That's a form of sense. You instinctively know that you're not falling. And if you've played on VR and you don't quite get the VR right, you feel nauseous and fall over very quickly. It happened with 3D as well. So you have to watch out for balance, but you can create a sensation and you can perceptually make people feel like they're swaying if you create the right intensity. And that's what happens within the VR environment quite a lot. And temperature. You don't go near fires. Why? Because they're hot. So you have an instinct and you can feel the temperature. Now, is there a way of should we turn up the heating in people's room or the air conditioning when they're watching a ski Sunday or something like that, or the Dakar races when everybody goes to watch the World Cup at the end of this year? Should we automatically turn up the central heating in their houses so they can feel at home in the Qatar heat? And then there's two final one. Proprioception. Touch your nose, quick. Everybody touch your nose or touch your elbow. You do it instinctively. You don't think where your nose is. It's a sense. You instinctively know something. So how can you introduce that? Is that something we could play around with? You didn't really need to touch your nose, but it was a good interaction, and it amused me from this side to see how many people actually did touch their nose. So you don't get a prize, by the way. And nocioception. That's the pain. That's when you kind of you touch something that's red hot, you instinctively move away from it. And that's kind of a reaction. It's a visceral reaction to something that happens. So what I'm trying to say is at the moment, on TV, on broadcast, we're just using two of all these senses, 9 senses, and we're just using 2 of them. So there's opportunity as we move forward to try and use more of them. So my opening question for this illustrious crew, are any of those teasing you? Are any of those, do you think, can actually be implemented as we move forward?
I think
Harris, go for it.
I think I like the idea of haptics. I think it depends on the context for me. Like sometimes if I'm watching TV, I just don't want to work too hard. But if I'm gaming or something, or if I was interacting with a piece of VR content, or something that's intentionally immersive and lean forward, then those things will make a lot more sense. And I guess being able to feel the objects that I'm interacting with, or maybe smell my environment or whatever, might be appropriate.
So a few haptics and a bit of smell.
Yeah.
Dave?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the sort of the sensation of being in underground. You can feel it coming. I mean, a few years ago, in the office, we had a butt kicker. So it's basically a vibrator under your seat. And it connected to this audio system. It just picked up all the very low frequencies, and it just gave you that extra sort of feeling through the chest. So particularly if you're wearing headphones as well, because headphones, you don't get that kind of subwoofer thing. But
the visceral feel.
Sitting on that, you get the...
Okay. Well, we know what you do in your downtime, David. I think we'll move on now.
On that note.
Very, very quickly.
I think what it shows to me is that there's more objects that you're going to need to carry at some point, and it means you need to have a way to carry them.
So you're
together.
selling object-based media as a...
Well, I mean, you're going to have. Please don't build a special system for balance. Let's have a system that can accommodate all of them. And as we've just heard, some people want to turn them on and off, so we need the ability to turn them on and off.
Okay, we're not going to have any time for any questions. I'm going to ask you a very quick question. Lean forward or lean back experience for when watching television as we move forward?
Bit of both.
I'm mostly lean back.
Lean back and relax.
Yeah.
It's your choice. Personalize it. Have your objects on and off.
So we got somebody sitting on the fence. There's always one of those, isn't there? Unfortunately, we had a couple more questions, and I think I'm going to do this. I'm going to see what we've got on here. From the audience, just to make sure you have been involved. Here's a good one. What about screenless technologies such as holograms? Are those concepts any closer to reality? You've probably got about 10 seconds to say yes or no.
I think they're coming, certainly.
Holograms are coming. Nod. No audio in holograms.
Non-square is
About
certainly
audio
coming.
to holograms. I mean, on stage ones, don't you?
I suppose it's more ambience, isn't
Yeah,
it? Sonic.
yeah.
Gareth?
Yeah, there are people working on them actively. So.
Okay. So it is. And the final question, which unfortunately we're not going to have time to talk about, which is a pity really, trials of 8K. It's an interesting one, and Pat and I were talking earlier, but before I close, because I realise we've managed to make up a lot of time, 8K, you need to get better pixels still, and those more pixels can sometimes give you worse pixels, so it's harder to make the picture look better with more pixels, even though there are more pixels, because they're not quite as good as the original pixels. Is my viewpoint. So kind of 8K is used in production. It will probably flow through naturally because they're 8K screens, but at this point in time, the question there is, are there any trials in 8K? I think there are trials in the background happening everywhere. It would be silly not to keep an eye on it, but I don't think there's kind of plans in the forefront to actually kind of push things forward too quickly at this point in time. So watch this space on that final question. I've taken a minute more than I had to, so it basically means you've only got 4 minutes to get to the next session, I expect. So get your sprinting shoes on. Thank you very much, and please give a round of applause to our